happened in a room filled with witnesses, polished silver, and decades of royal restraint. But when Princess Anne slowly turned toward Queen Camilla and delivered a single chilling sentence in front of senior aides and family insiders, the atmosphere inside Clarence House reportedly shifted instantly. Conversations stopped, faces hardened, and according to palace whispers, even King Charles looked shaken. What triggered Anne's icy warning, and why are insiders calling it the most explosive royal confrontation in years? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What began as an ordinary strategy discussion reportedly unraveled with frightening speed. Insiders whisper that the gathering had originally been arranged to address upcoming royal engagements, internal staffing changes, and concerns surrounding the stability of palace operations during King Charles's ongoing health struggles. The mood, according to various interpretations from those familiar with the meeting, was already tense before Princess Anne even entered the room. There had reportedly been weeks of growing discomfort behind palace. Walls, quiet disagreements buried beneath carefully rehearsed public appearances. But no one expected the silence to finally break in such a direct and devastating way. Sources close to senior royal staff claim Queen Camilla arrived determined to reinforce her influence over several key decisions tied to ceremonial authority and household management. Over recent months, reports suggest her role around the king had expanded significantly, with certain aides allegedly beginning to defer to her office before consulting long-standing palace officials. To outsiders, these shifts may have appeared insignificant. Inside the monarchy, however, where hierarchy and tradition are treated almost like sacred law, even the smallest adjustment can trigger enormous consequences. And according to insiders, Princess Anne had been watching those changes with growing concern. Witnesses reportedly described the atmosphere becoming noticeably colder once discussions turned toward operational control inside Clarence House. Camilla, said to be calm but firm, allegedly defended the need for a tighter inner circle around the king during what palace aides privately call a period of institutional vulnerability. But Anne, whose reputation inside royal circles has long been tied to discipline, duty, and absolute loyalty to the crown, reportedly viewed the situation very differently. Sources suggest she believed certain boundaries were quietly being crossed, and that the monarchy itself was beginning to drift away from the traditions Queen Elizabeth II fought tirelessly to preserve. Then came the interruption that changed everything. According to palace whispers, Camilla had barely finished defending her position when Anne suddenly cut across the conversation with a tone several witnesses later described as measured, icy, and unusually direct. One insider claimed the room instantly fell silent because everyone present understood something extraordinary was happening. Anne was not known for emotional outbursts. She did not raise her voice for effect. That was what made the moment so unsettling. Reports suggest she slowly turned toward Camilla before delivering a chilling warning centered on loyalty, legacy, and the dangerous cost of allowing personal influence to overshadow institutional duty. The exact wording remains fiercely guarded behind palace walls, but insiders claim one flaw. Sassy from Anne's warning is now being quietly repeated among senior staff. According to several interpretations, the message carried a devastating implication: that no individual, regardless of title or position beside the king, could ever place themselves above the survival of the crown. Witnesses allegedly exchanged nervous glances almost immediately. One palace aide reportedly looked down at the table while another sat completely motionless. Even more striking was the reported reaction from King Charles himself. Sources suggest the king remained silent for several long moments after Anne finished speaking, avoiding eye contact as the weight of the confrontation settled over the room. That silence, according to royal insiders, may have revealed more than words ever could, because behind the confrontation itself lies something even more unsettling: a growing divide within the monarchy during one of the most fragile periods in modern royal history. Reports continue to suggest that tensions surrounding influence, loyalty, and the future direction of the institution have been quietly intensifying for years, hidden beneath public smiles and carefully controlled appearances. And for many, inside palace circles, Anne's warning was not simply about one disagreement or one meeting. It was a signal that a deeper struggle had finally reached the surface. But the warning Anne delivered wasn't born from one disagreement. It was the culmination of tensions that had been building quietly for years behind palace doors. For years, the monarchy survived by hiding its fractures behind ceremony and tradition. Yet insiders now claim the relationship between Princess Anne and Queen Camilla had become increasingly strained long before this shocking confrontation. Beneath public smiles and carefully staged appearances, a silent power struggle was reportedly unfolding, one rooted in influence, trust, and the future direction of the crown itself. What made the tension so unsettling, according to those familiar with palace operations, was how quietly it evolved. Nothing exploded publicly. There were no dramatic announcements, no visible breakdowns in protocol, no open declarations of conflict. Instead, reports suggest the divide grew in whispers, private frustrations, and subtle changes that only those deep inside royal circles could truly recognize. Senior aides allegedly began noticing. Long-standing structures within the monarchy were slowly shifting. Certain advisors who had served the institution loyally for decades reportedly found themselves excluded from conversations they once controlled. New faces appeared more frequently around Camilla's office, and according to insiders, their influence seemed to expand with startling speed. Princess Anne, often described by palace staff as fiercely protective of royal discipline, allegedly viewed these developments with mounting concern. Sources whisper that Anne believed the monarchy's survival depended on preserving the old institutional framework established during Queen Elizabeth II's reign. To Anne, tradition was not symbolic decoration. It was the backbone holding the crown together during moments of instability. And during a period already overshadowed by King Charles's health struggles, insiders claim she feared the monarchy was becoming dangerously vulnerable to internal imbalance. Reports suggest Anne became especially uneasy as Camilla's inner circle reportedly gained increasing administrative authority behind the scenes. Certain aides allegedly began bypassing long-established palace channels, while individually. Anne emerged from. Individuals connected to Camilla were said to be quietly shaping decisions tied to scheduling, staffing, and ceremonial planning. On the surface, these adjustments appeared ordinary, but within the deeply structured hierarchy of the royal household, even minor shifts can carry enormous implications. According to various interpretations circulating among palace staff, Anne saw these moves not as routine modernization, but as the gradual erosion of the old guard that had protected the institution for generations. Prince William, insiders claim, quietly shared many of Anne's concerns. Though careful to avoid public involvement in any internal divisions, reports suggest the Prince of Wales had become increasingly focused on maintaining discipline and continuity within the monarchy as pressure around the royal family intensified. Sources close to palace operations allege that William and Anne held several private discussions regarding the importance of preserving stability during what many viewed as one of the most uncertain periods the institution had faced in decades. Both reportedly understood that public confidence in the monarchy depended not only on appearances, but on the internal unit of the family itself. Yet despite efforts to contain the growing discomfort, subtle signs of tension reportedly began surfacing during official events. Observers noticed brief moments of visible distance between Anne and Camilla during ceremonies, receptions, and family gatherings. Palace insiders allegedly described conversations becoming shorter, colder, and increasingly formal. Staff whispers painted an even darker picture behind closed doors, with some employees privately describing the atmosphere as divided into camps. According to reports, loyalties inside the palace were quietly hardening. Some aligned themselves closely with Camilla's expanding influence, while others remained fiercely protective of the traditional structure associated with Anne and the late Queen Elizabeth II. At the center of it all stood King Charles, reportedly exhausted by the growing strain surrounding him. Sources suggest the king found himself trapped between devotion to his wife and deep trust in his sister, whose loyalty to the institution had never once been questioned. Insiders claim Charles repeatedly attempted to preserve peace behind palace walls, hoping the tensions would ease before. They escalated into something impossible to control. But as the divisions deepened and anxieties surrounding influence continued to grow, those closest to the monarchy allegedly began fearing that the fragile balance holding everything together was nearing collapse. And according to those familiar with the palace's internal dynamics, the breaking point came after one controversial decision that Anne simply could not ignore. The confrontation reportedly exploded after a decision involving royal access, ceremonial authority, and control over key palace operations. What seemed minor to outsiders was allegedly viewed by Princess Anne as something far more dangerous, a quiet reshaping of the monarchy's traditional balance of power. And once Anne realized how far things had gone, insiders claim she decided the silence had to end. According to palace whispers, the situation intensified during confidential discussions tied to preparations for several major state events scheduled during an already fragile period for the royal family. Reports suggest Queen Camilla had begun pushing for greater influence over ceremonial planning, including decisions traditionally managed through long-established channels connected to senior palace officials and royal protocol advisors. To the public, these changes may have appeared administrative, even harmless. But inside the monarchy, where centuries of hierarchy operate with almost military precision, insiders claim the implications were enormous. Princess Anne allegedly viewed the shift not simply as a logistical adjustment, but as a direct challenge to the institutional structure Queen Elizabeth II spent decades protecting. Sources familiar with the palace's internal dynamics claim Anne became particularly alarmed after several trusted figures reportedly found themselves excluded from conversations surrounding upcoming royal appearances and diplomatic planning. Staff members who had served the crown for years were allegedly bypassed as newer voices gained increasing authority around Camilla's office. Reports suggest certain ceremonial recommendations traditionally overseen by established palace departments were quietly redirected through channels more closely aligned with Camilla's advisors. To Anne, insiders whisper this was no longer about personality clashes or family disagreements. It was about control. Palace aides reportedly feared a direct collision between the two senior royals long before the now infamous confrontation finally occurred. According to various interpretations from those familiar with internal operations, the atmosphere behind closed doors had become increasingly strained with every passing week. Meetings reportedly grew colder. Conversations became more guarded. Even long-serving staff allegedly sensed that something dangerous was building beneath the surface. One insider claimed the tension became impossible to ignore during final preparations for a major upcoming state gathering, when disagreements over ceremonial positioning and administrative oversight reportedly triggered quiet panic among senior aides. Princess Anne, known throughout royal circles for her uncompromising dedication to duty, allegedly responded by beginning a series of private discussions with trusted figures inside the institution. Sources suggest these meetings were not emotional or impulsive. They were calculated, deliberate, and deeply serious. Anne reportedly wanted clarity about how much influence had shifted behind palace walls and whether the monarchy's traditional structure was slowly being rewritten during King Charles's vulnerable period. Several insiders claim Prince William was also briefed about the growing concerns, particularly surrounding the preservation of royal discipline and continuity at a time when public confidence in the institution remained critically important. As whispers spread among staff, fears reportedly grew that the monarchy itself was drifting toward internal division. Some palace employees allegedly began describing an atmosphere of uncertainty, unlike anything they had experienced during Queen Elizabeth II's reign. According to reports, loyalties hardened quietly behind the scenes. Certain aides aligned themselves closely with Camilla's expanding network, while others remained deeply loyal to Anne and the old institutional framework associated with stability, restraint, and protocol. The divide was rarely spoken about openly, but insiders claim it could be felt in nearly every room, every meeting, and every carefully measured interaction between senior members of the family. Observers who encountered Anne during this period reportedly noticed a dramatic shift in her demeanor. While always disciplined and reserved, sources claim she became increasingly resolute in private discussions, speaking with what one insider described as absolute clarity about what was at stake. To Anne, reports suggest, this was no longer simply about preserving tradition for tradition's sake. It was about defending the crown during a moment of immense vulnerability. And as tensions surrounding ceremonial authority and palace operations continued escalating, those closest to the monarchy allegedly understood that a decisive moment was approaching rapidly. Then came the meeting where everything changed. The moment Anne reportedly looked directly at Camilla and delivered the words now haunting palace corridors. Witnesses reportedly remember the silence more than the words themselves. The room had gone still. Papers remained untouched. And then Princess Anne, known for decades as the monarchy's iron-willed enforcer, allegedly fixed her gaze on Camilla and delivered a message insiders describe as both devastating and unmistakably final. In that instant, the palace's private tensions were no longer hidden. According to sources familiar with the meeting, the atmosphere inside the room shifted long before Anne even spoke. Staff members reportedly sensed that the GIR tension surrounding ceremonial authority and palace influence had finally reached a breaking point. Conversations that began as formal discussions about royal operations had allegedly transformed into something far more personal, far more dangerous. Camilla, insiders claim, continued defending the need for stronger influence around the king during a period of institutional uncertainty. But Anne reportedly saw the matter through a completely different lens. To her, the issue was never about convenience or modern restructuring. It was about protecting the monarchy from internal instability at a moment when the crown could least afford division. Then came the warning that insiders now describe as one of the coldest moments in recent royal memory. Reports suggest Anne spoke slowly and with absolute control, her voice calm enough to make the words feel even heavier. Witnesses claim she warned that the institution must always come before personal influence. A sentence that allegedly landed across the room with almost suffocating force. No shouting, no emotional theatrics. That was what made it so devastating. Anne reportedly did not need anger to command the room. Her reputation alone carried decades of authority, sacrifice, and unwavering devotion to royal duty. And according to several palace whispers, everyone present immediately understood that this was no ordinary disagreement between senior royals. Camilla, insiders claim, appeared visibly stunned by the directness of the confrontation. Those familiar with royal protocol describe such moments as extraordinarily rare, especially within private strategy gatherings where restraint and diplomacy are expected above all else. Reports suggest Camilla initially attempted to respond, but the atmosphere had already changed beyond repair. One witness allegedly described the room as feeling frozen, with aides avoiding eye contact, and remaining completely motionless as the weight of Anne's warning settled over the gathering. Perhaps even more unsettling was the reported reaction from King Charles himself. Sources claim the king lowered his gaze during the exchange and remained silent for several painfully long moments afterward. For many insiders, that silence carried enormous meaning. Charles had reportedly spent months trying to preserve balance between loyalty to his wife and trust in his sister, two-figure, who represented completely different visions of influence inside the monarchy. But in that moment, according to palace whispers, the fragile equilibrium holding everything together appeared dangerously close to collapse. Several insiders later claimed Anne's warning carried unmistakable echoes of Queen Elizabeth II's philosophy of duty above self-interest. Throughout her reign, the late Queen reportedly emphasized that the institution could only survive when personal ambitions remained secondary to the stability of the crown. Sources suggest Anne invoked that same principle directly during the confrontation, allegedly referencing the need to preserve the stability of the crown above all else. To those inside the room, the message was unmistakable. Anne was not simply defending protocol. She was defending what she believed to be the monarchy's very foundation. In the aftermath, palace aides reportedly avoided speaking for several minutes after the meeting ended. Some insiders described the moment as a line being drawn publicly inside the family, while others feared the confrontation would permanently alter internal royal dynamics moving forward. Staff members allegedly understood. I see good immediately that too many people had witnessed the exchange for it to remain completely buried behind palace walls. And as nervous conversations quietly began spreading through corridors and private offices, one fear reportedly overshadowed everything else: that the monarchy's deepest internal divisions were no longer containable. But the real shock came afterward, when whispers about the confrontation began spreading far beyond that private room. Within hours, insiders claimed the atmosphere across royal residences became tense and deeply unsettled. Staff conversations reportedly stopped when senior aides entered rooms. Phones were watched carefully, and behind closed doors, one terrifying question began circulating through palace corridors. Had the monarchy's internal divisions finally become impossible to contain? According to palace whispers, the aftermath of the confrontation spread with astonishing speed despite immediate efforts to suppress discussion. Reports suggest senior staff quietly instructed employees not to speak about the meeting under any circumstances. warning that even casual conversations could trigger damaging leaks during an already fragile moment for the institution. But by then, insiders claimed the damage had already begun. Too many people had witnessed the exchange. Too many aides had seen the stunned expressions, the silence, the tension hanging over the room after Anne's chilling warning to Camilla. And within the tightly connected world surrounding the monarchy, silence rarely stays intact for long. Sources familiar with royal operations allege fragments of the confrontation quickly began reaching journalists known for their close palace connections. Certain details reportedly surfaced first through carefully worded whispers rather than direct confirmations, with royal correspondents suddenly hinting at serious tensions unfolding behind the scenes. Media figures allegedly noticed something even more unusual during those hours that followed: growing nervousness among senior aides themselves. Staff members who normally projected rigid confidence reportedly appeared guarded, distracted, and unusually cautious during interactions with reporters and palace personnel alike. The deeper fear, according to insiders, was not simply that the argument would leak publicly. It was what the confrontation represented beneath the surface. For years, the monarchy had relied on discipline, unity, and carefully maintained appearances to preserve stability through scandal, illness, and public scrutiny. But reports suggest many inside the institution now feared that those foundations were beginning to crack under pressure. One palace source allegedly described the atmosphere as emotionally exhausted, with staff quietly wondering whether private divisions among senior royals had finally reached a point where they could no longer be contained behind ceremonial smiles and official statements. King Charles, insiders claim, reportedly moved quickly to prevent the situation from spiraling further. Sources suggest the king sought separate private conversations with both Anne and Camilla shortly after the confrontation, hoping to calm tensions before deeper fractures emerged. But according to various interpretations from those familiar with the aftermath, Charles himself appeared deeply strained by the situation. Already facing enormous personal and institutional pressure, the king was allegedly forced into the painful position of mediating between two figures who represented profoundly different approaches to power, loyalty, and influence within the crown. Prince William was also reportedly informed about the growing fallout as concerns intensified behind palace walls. Insiders suggest the Prince of Wales became increasingly aware that the confrontation was no longer being viewed internally as a simple family disagreement. Instead, many allegedly saw it as evidence of a much larger struggle over the monarchy's future direction during one of its most uncertain chapters in decades. Sources claim William remained cautious publicly but privately understood the seriousness of the divisions now threatening to surface. Meanwhile, reports suggest Camilla's allies worked aggressively behind the scenes to minimize the severity of the clash. Several insiders allegedly attempted to frame the confrontation as a routine disagreement exaggerated by palace gossip. But according to staff whispers, those explanations failed to calm growing anxieties among employees and royal observers alike. The tension had already become visible in subtler ways. Royal watchers reportedly began noticing changes in public appearances, body language, and interactions between senior members of the family. Brief moments once dismissed as ordinary, fatigue were suddenly being interpreted through a completely different lens. And that is what made the situation feel so dangerous to those closest to the institution. Because once the illusion of unity begins to weaken, every silence, every glance, every carefully measured interaction starts carrying deeper meaning. Insiders claim many inside the palace feared the confrontation had exposed something the monarchy had spent years desperately trying to protect from public view. The possibility that internal divisions were growing stronger than the institution's ability to conceal them. And as the whispers grew louder, many insiders began asking whether Anne's warning was about more than Camilla alone. It may have been about the survival of the monarchy itself. For Princess Anne, duty was never negotiable. Those who have watched her for decades describe a royal figure shaped not by popularity or image, but by discipline, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty to the institution her mother spent a lifetime protecting. Which is why insiders believe Anne's chilling message to Camilla carried a meaning far beyond one heated confrontation. It was a warning about the future of the crown itself. According to those familiar with the inner workings of the monarchy, Anne has long viewed the royal institution not as a personal privilege, but as a sacred responsibility carried across generations through sacrifice and restraint. Unlike figures who became consumed by image management or public approval, Anne reportedly embraced the harsher realities of royal life decades ago. Duty came first, always. That belief, insiders claim, was deeply shaped by Queen Elizabeth II, whose philosophy centered on protecting the crown even during moments of personal pain, family division, and enormous public scrutiny. And now, as uncertainty continues surrounding King Charles's health and the monarchy's future direction, sources suggest Anne fears the institution is entering one of the most vulnerable periods in modern royal history. Reports indicate Anne's greatest concern is not one disagreement, one confrontation, or even one individual. It is the possibility of instability spreading quietly through the palace at a time when the monarchy can least afford weakness. Insiders claim she believes the crown survives only when senior royals place institutional continuity above personal influence or emotional loyalties. That principle reportedly shaped every word she delivered during the now infamous confrontation with Camilla. To Anne, according to various palace whispers, protecting the monarchy means making difficult decisions before small fractures become irreversible crises. Prince William is also reportedly becoming increasingly aligned with Anne's approach to preserving royal continuity. Sources familiar with internal discussions claim both figures share concerns about maintaining discipline, structure, and stability behind palace walls during a period marked by uncertainty and public pressure. Though William remains cautious in public, insiders suggest he has quietly taken notice of the growing divisions surrounding influence within the royal household. Reports claim the Prince of Wales understands that the monarchy's survival depends not only on public trust, but on preventing internal tensions from destabilizing the institution itself. At the same time, sources allege Queen Camilla remains determined to maintain her influence around King Charles, particularly as his physical vulnerability continues shaping palace operations behind closed doors. Supporters of Camilla reportedly argue that her presence provides consistency and emotional support for the king during an immensely difficult chapter in his reign. But critics inside royal circles allegedly fear that expanding influence around the monarch risks deepening existing divisions among senior royals already struggling to maintain unity beneath the surface. Royal insiders now describe the palace atmosphere as one of quiet uncertainty. The confrontation between Anne and Camilla reportedly changed internal dynamics in ways that cannot easily be reversed. Relationships once maintained through diplomacy and careful restraint now appear more fragile, more guarded, and far more politically sensitive than before. Sources suggest many senior aides remain deeply concerned about what further tensions could mean for the monarchy moving forward, especially if public awareness surrounding internal divisions continues growing. For many observers, Anne's warning carried unmistakable echoes of Queen Elizabeth II's enduring philosophy, that the monarchy can only survive when individuals sacrifice personal ambition for institutional stability. That belief defined an entire reign, and according to insiders, Anne now sees herself as one of the last remaining guardians of that principle during a period of profound transition inside the House of Windsor. The challenge facing the monarchy now may be greater than any single confrontation. It is the growing pressure to preserve unity while private tensions continue intensifying behind palace walls. Because once trust begins to weaken inside an institution built on loyalty, silence itself becomes dangerous. Every appearance, every interaction, every carefully measured statement begins carrying hidden meaning. And according to palace whispers, the confrontation between Anne and Camilla may not have ended the struggle at all. It may have only exposed how deep the divisions have truly become. Because behind the palace smiles, ceremonial waves, and carefully staged appearances, insiders whisper that the battle for the future of the monarchy may only just be beginning. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.